I guess this is the second part of my 15 minutes of fame. I think I'm down to 8 minutes now. Our guest of honor this morning is a multi-award winning journalist who has over 20 years of involvement in the radio and television industry. He currently hosts Tonight with Mr. Bruce Whitfield on CNBC, The Money Show on 702, and Taking Stock, a weekly TV show on ENCA. Mr. Whitfield's trophy cabinet is filled with various trophies and accolades to show for his hard work throughout the years. The most prominent being named the Financial Journalist of the Year 3 times in the past decade alone. For those who talk football, that is more titles than Orlando Pirates have won in the same time frame. He has a great ability of sharing compelling stories about the political economy in a way that is creative, engaging, and makes money matters accessible to the broader audience. This is visible in his first book titled The Upside of Down, which explores how chaos and uncertainty breed opportunity in South Africa. So we look forward to hearing your message this morning, and I can think of no one better to address us as we transition into an uncertain and volatile economic situation post-national lockdown. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Bruce Whitfield to the podium.
Taviso, thanks very, very much. Good morning, good afternoon. Hello, everybody. It's been a long day, courtesy of Eskom and the airlines. Ladies and gentlemen, boys of Hilton, it's a huge, huge honor to be invited as an old Andrian to come to the esteemed fields of Hilton and to address you today. I'm afraid I'm going to ask you to do some more work, and it's the last thing you want to do. There are 3 books that in your holidays I want you to read. The first one, just because I wrote it, The Upside of Down. George. It matches the outfit. I'm very sensitive to that sort of thing. The other one is this book. It's called Factfulness. It's by a man called Hans Rosling, the late Hans Rosling. The third one I'm going to keep as a bit of a surprise. I chose to write the book, The Upside of Down, because I got fed up about the one-way narrative of South Africa, the South Africa doom and gloom story, the South Africa story that you will hear every time you switch on the radio, turn on your television news, pick up a newspaper. All of what you see there is true, by and large, depending on your interpretation. But what you don't see is a whole view of South Africa, and you certainly don't see a whole view of the world. You get the news. The news, by definition, is stuff that is news. I mean, our forefathers, our ancestors lived in caves, and when a gazelle went past, it wasn't news. Unless everybody was hungry, then it was news, and you went out, you hunted it, you brought it back, you cooked it, and you ate it. However, if a saber-toothed tiger walked past, well, that was news. There was danger. You had to get away. News kind of works that way too. And I was reflecting on my own time and sitting through speech days and thinking just how interminably boring they were, without fail. They were grotesque torture sessions. I don't even remember. Well, I remember one person because he was the most awful of all. His name was Chris Yenis. He was a National Party government minister. Goodness knows why he was invited. All I remember is the word constitutional development. And I remember thinking to myself, I have no idea what you're talking about, and nor do you. And please, can this end soon? And less than a decade later, it all did come to an end and things moved on. In the same way, today, I've then got to figure out, how do I make this memorable? So I figured out I'll talk about you, because you remember that, you millennials. That's what you're all about. So let's talk about you. Let's talk about the year 2020. Let's talk about just what a horrible year it has been, just how many of your hopes and expectations have been dashed. This is meant to be your glory year. This is meant to be the year that you run out on the rugby field, you go and you take on Michael House at everything, and perhaps even occasionally win something. This was the pinnacle of your school career. This was what you spent the entire 11 previous years and playgroup working for. And you had it taken away from you by a virus. And I would like to suggest to you, in the spirit of the upside of down, you're possibly the luckiest matric year in history, because you've learned things that school doesn't teach you. You've learned that things don't always go your way. You've learned that no matter how rich, how influential, how handsome you are, when something like a pandemic strikes, everybody is affected in the same way. You've learned that the world isn't a safe and easy place. It's a lesson that often we forget because we think we're in control, and what 2020 has taught us is we're by far not in control. And that, I think, is a good lesson. You've had to adapt. You've had to change. You've had to be flexible. You've had to be nimble. You've had to learn online. You've had to learn under extreme circumstances, interact under extreme circumstances. And that has given you a lesson in life that is irreplaceable. So I think 2020 actually has happened quite well. Not what you signed up for. There's Vladimir Lenin, and I didn't ever think I'd quote Lenin in a capitalist environment, but hey, let's do it. There are decades when nothing happens and weeks where decades happen. And that is 2020 for you in a nutshell. This ugly beast came in and changed everything. I usually talk to corporate audiences, and so this is an office, but may as well be one of your classrooms. This would have been your classrooms as you came back in January. When I was at Davos at the World Economic Forum in January, the world was looking as if everybody was going to come back to here, and within weeks it all turned up like that. Your classrooms ended up like that for a period of time as well. And as the great boxer Mike Tyson, not a very nice man and a bit of a cannibal, once said, everyone has a plan until you're punched in the mouth. And that was your plan, wasn't it? You came with great plans for 2020, and you had to adapt those plans. And those lessons of being nimble are absolutely critical. When it comes to interpreting the future and understanding the world that you're going into, I urge you always to pay attention to facts. And that's why I want you to read the book Factfulness. It is a marvelous, marvelous book by Hans Rosling, who was a medical doctor who spent much time in Africa understanding diseases, outbreaks. He was critical in the understanding of Ebola. He also talks a lot about why it is that we find that we don't understand the world at all. He would go to audiences around the globe and he would find, he would ask simple questions, simple questions. Is the world getting richer or poorer? But he would do it by showing pictures of informal settlements, for example. And most people in his privileged audiences would go, well, clearly it's getting poorer. Is the world getting, are more people being vaccinated than not being vaccinated? And he would show queues in hospitals in India, and people would go, of course people aren't getting vaccinated. The world's falling apart. And I'll sort of summarize for you, if I may. War, violence, natural disasters, man-made disasters, corruption, things are bad and it feels like they're getting worse, right? The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, the number of poor just keeps on increasing. And we'll soon run out of resources unless we do something drastic. At least that's the picture that most Westerners see in media and carry around in their heads. I call it an over-dramatic worldview. It's stressful and it's misleading. In fact, the vast majority of the world's population lives somewhere in the middle of the income scale. Perhaps they're not what we think of as middle class, but they're not living in extreme poverty. Their girls go to school, children get vaccinated, have two-child families. So step by step, year by year, the world is improving. Not in every single measure, every single year, but as a rule. This is the year that it didn't really, things didn't improve. Things went quite dramatically backwards. But it's a useful reminder to understand in a post-truth world that you need to arm yourself with facts. And some people struggle with facts more than others. All through his presidency, Donald Trump has struggled with the truth, and now he can't face the one incontrovertible truth of 306 electoral college votes for Joe Biden. Which is why, and this quote is often attributed to Mark Twain, politicians in diapers should be changed often and for the same reason. Take that with you as you consider your life in democracy. For Sleepy Joe, 78 years old when he becomes president officially on the 20th of January next year, He inherits a very different world to the one that was passed over to Donald Trump by Barack Obama. And he has to make some incredibly big decisions, decisions like you're going to have to make, imperfect decisions in an imperfect world with imperfect information. And again, 2020 is, I think, stood to be a fine test for you in terms of your decision-making ability. What are you going to do in 2021? Are you going to take a gap year? Are you going to go to university? Do you just want to get as far away from reality as possible? Well, as you make these decisions, understand that you're never going to make the perfect decision. You will second guess yourself. You will find it difficult to do. In World War II, engineers were looking at the problem of aircraft getting shot down over the South Pacific. And so they mapped where the aircraft that were coming back to base were being hit. And they decided, in their wisdom, that the most vulnerable parts of the aircraft were the tips of the wings, the fuselage just behind the engines, and the tail, because every single aircraft that limped back to base was shot to smithereens in these places. So they were going about arming these aircraft and armoring them and making them more resilient and making them tougher, and realizing that they were going to be considerably less nimble in the air than they'd ever was desirable. And some of them might not even get off the ground because they'd be too blooming heavy to do that. Until one of them, a statistician, said, guys, we're looking at the wrong thing. We're seeing the aircraft that are making it back. The ones that aren't making it back are getting shot where the pilot sits in the cockpit. They've been shot in the engines. The tails are being blown off. It forced them to rethink because they looked at the facts slightly differently. They looked at the facts holistically. They looked at the problem in a way that hadn't been looked at before. And we talk about imperfect decisions and imperfect times. For Cyril Ramaphosa, who put us all in lockdown in March, it was an enormously courageous and difficult decision to make, because the consequences of the decision, because no decision you ever take is going to have zero consequence. Some of the consequences will be good and some of the consequences will be bad. For Cyril Ramaphosa, his first reason for doing what he did was to save lives, to save a health system that is already under huge pressure from crumbling completely. Understanding that 2 million people would lose their jobs, that his government doesn't have the money to keep that sort of inequality in abeyance in perpetuity. But he had to make an impossible decision, and a courageous decision. And it's not a decision any of us liked, and particularly when he extended it for another 2 weeks, and for some of you boys, made you go and buy cigarettes you wouldn't ordinarily buy. Imperfect times and imperfect decisions. For Shamila Batoy, who gets a job of being National Director of Public Prosecutions, she goes into an environment that has been so badly destroyed by the administration that preceded Cyril Ramaphosa that she didn't know who she could trust. And again, for you, you're going to go into university environments, work environments, you're going to start your own businesses. You're not going to know who you can and can't trust often. Often the bonds that you formed here are going to be the strongest bonds that you will have throughout your lives, because you're never going to know anybody as well as you know the class of 2020, because the bonds that connect you are incredibly, incredibly strong. For Shamila Batoy, it's taken her 18 months in the job to really get down to what matters, to really get down to tackling the big issues which threatened to steal your future. I say threatened in the past tense, because I think we may just have pulled ourselves back from the brink, because that's where South Africa tragically likes to live, on the very edge of self-destruction. We focus far too much, though, on those guys. I would like you to focus more on these kinds of people. These are real people, by the way. My kids like Star Wars. I've slept through every single Star Wars movie ever made. I must confess that now, but it's a cool image. People like Aisha Pandor, who started Sweep South and Sweep South Connect. She creates opportunities for people to get work and to get jobs. For people like Stacey Brewer, for example, second from the right on the bottom, who started Spark Schools as a young woman in 2010 running FIFA's World Cup facilities. She wanted to earn enough money to go get an MBA, and then she was going to go overseas and get a job. That was her plan, and halfway through her MBA, she has an epiphany. She says, can't we take technology and marry it to education and deliver private school education for less than government spends on educating a government school kid, and can we do it better? And she does. She's got 21 campuses. She's educating 15,000 kids every single year. She opened her first high school this year. What terrible timing, but she stuck it out. Entrepreneurs of the future. People with great ideas are the future. They're the rebels and the renegades and the problem solvers. And what we need is problem solvers. South Africa is a country with so many problems, but in those problems lie extraordinary opportunity to solve them. I was chatting to a friend of mine the other day who's launching a brand new airline, and his name is Gidon Novik. Before you guys were born, there weren't low-cost airlines. You might not know this, but there was BA or Comair, and there was SAA. There was nothing else. There was no choice. And Gidon Novik came up with this crazy idea of low-cost airlines. He was told it would never work. Kaluda.com will still be going fairly soon. But he created a brand new industry, and he said to me the other day, I'm going to launch a new airline. I said, get on. You do know. Get on. Somebody needs to talk to you. You know there's a pandemic, right? Nobody's flying. I said, yeah. I said, you know that SAA is bankrupt and Comair has gone into business rescue and is bankrupt and may or may not come back. I said, yeah. I said, so why are you launching a new airline? You could do anything in the world. And he goes, because there's an opportunity. And I said, but what do you drink first thing in the morning that makes you see opportunity where other people run away from? He said, if you hang around with the sort of people I hang around with, you can't but be an optimist because there is so much opportunity. And the lesson from that is surround yourself with people who are optimistic. In many, many years of talking to billionaires and going to places like Davos and seeing the extraordinary talent that I get to come in contact with on a regular basis, there are a couple of things that people who do well in life, whether they be environmentalists, whether they be artists, whether they be business people, some of them even politicians. I've got a nephew who's one, and he's actually quite nice. But there are a couple of things they've got in common. They have extraordinary optimism. And optimism isn't a nanny state kind of belief that, oh, kumbaya, everything's going to be fine. It's not. It's seeing risk and danger, but navigating that risk and danger and understanding that if you can navigate it better than everybody else, you will get ahead. So they are relentless optimists. Nando's. Who knows what year Nando's was founded? 1987. There was time before you as well, kids. Honestly, there was. 1987. Nando's was founded. What was happening in 1987? South Africa was dead. We defaulted on our debt. We couldn't pay our bills. We were embroiled in a civil war. Nelson Mandela and ANC leaders were still, PAC leaders, political opposition to the National Party, all still in jail. Bombs were exploding all over the place. South Africa was dead in the water. There was no hope. We were so deep in the hole of junk that there was no future. Robbie Brosen, possibly the maddest, loveliest individual you will ever have the privilege to meet, starts a chicken restaurant with his friend Fernando Duarte in Rosettenville in Johannesburg, and they call it Nando's. There are 900 Nando's stores around the world. That same year, a guy, a fairly young accountant called Brian Joffe, starts a little business called Bidvest. Today, Bidvest has got global reach through a company called Bidcorp. It's long and boring. You don't really need to hear the full story. But the point is, in 1987, at the darkest time in South African history, got a bit darker after that too, they started businesses. And you say to them, but why did you do it then? And they say, there was opportunity. I had the privilege of meeting the three founders of First Rand, G.T. Ferreira, Paul Harris, and Laurie Dippenard. And I said to them, 2008, when the global financial crisis hit, must have been the hardest time in your lives. They go, yeah, it was. But I said, what about 1987? Surely that was hard. He goes, no, it was brilliant. I said, everybody else was giving up and capitulating. Everyone else was throwing in the towel. People were handing in their keys to the bank. They couldn't afford to pay their mortgages. And it was such a great time. Because at that time, Barclays had disinvested from South Africa and had left a little bank. And First Rand was being built, and these three guys wanted to buy a company called Southern Life, which no longer exists, but they bought it and they brought it in. It's part of Momentum now. An Anglo-American who owned Momentum said, well, if you're going to take, I beg your pardon, who owned Southern Life, said, if you're going to take Southern Life, you better take F&B as well. And so in an afternoon, they made a decision. They bought F&B. And the rest is history. The First Rand Group, one of the most powerful financial services groups in Africa, was born at a time where people see the biggest danger often presents the greatest opportunity. And for a long time, we've been overwhelmed by forces of darkness, the rascals and the reprobates and the problem causers, whether it be Marcus Jooste or whether it be Es Magashule or whether it be the Guptas, or pick your poison. I choose to focus less on them and more on the future. Piet Mouton, whose dad, Yanni Mouton, started PSG, which funded Capitec and Curo Schools and Stadio, which is a new university business. Piet Mouton says, negative people never build anything. And it is such a simple analogy, but it is so absolutely true. If you'd said to Steve Jobs, guy, cell phones already exist, why do you need a thing called a smartphone? And if he'd listened, well, I'll get to that in a moment. Say to Elon Musk, you know what? NASA does moon missions and sends rockets up into space. You don't need to worry your pretty little head about it. Yeah, motor cars exist. You don't need to make Teslas. But they see the world differently. They see opportunity. They see change. They see the future. I don't know how many of you have got a Panasonic device in your house, or would like to have a Panasonic device, or would like to have a Tesla device. Tesla, I'm guessing you'd like to have a Tesla device. The chief executive of Tesla says Elon Musk is a genius who defies common sense and can be overly optimistic. Elon Musk's response, I'd rather be optimistic and wrong than pessimistic and right. Because they have a positive mindset, they see opportunity in the future. Hans Rosling, the guy who wrote the Factfulness book, I like the toilet paper because this was before there was a big rush, he could get plenty. As human beings, we have an over-dramatic worldview. Guys, inform yourselves. Don't live just in social media. It can be very entertaining and it's great and it's distracting and it's awesome and it's fun, but it is also toxic, dangerous, and filled with misinformation. Broaden your reach, please, if you can. You're going to make big decisions in your life, and some of those decisions will work out well, and some of those decisions will work out badly. There are three people in this picture. I bet you know one. That's Steve Jobs, of course. You might know the guy with the beard. That's Steve Wozniak. He was the coder. The guy in the middle you may never have heard of. His name is Ronald Wayne. When Wozniak and Jobs started Apple, they were hooligans. They were lunatics. They had nothing to lose. They were in Jobs' mum's garage. There was nothing that they could lose, so they could stretch the boundaries of imagination, and they could really take huge risk. That's why early shareholders were getting a little bit panicky about how much risk they were taking, so they said to Ronald Wayne, Ronald, you're 10 years older than these guys, which put him in his 30s. You're a responsible sort. Can you go and look after them, please? We'll make sure that you get 10% of Apple shares. And Ronald Wayne met them and said, no, these are smart young guys. That's brilliant. And 2 weeks after he signed the deal that got him the 10% stake in Apple, he said, please, guys, take back your shares. I can't tolerate this anymore because you're driving me mad. There's too much risk. I've got a mortgage. I've got kids at school. There is no way that I can take the risks that you guys are taking. If I've got this 10% stake, they're going to come after my assets when you guys go bust. I'm out of here. What is Apple worth today? $2 trillion. Who got the maths prize? What's 10% of 2 trillion? 200 billion, which is why he got the maths prize. And virtually every other prize too. Did he make a good decision?
I don't think so, sir. CBA isn't worth it, sir. It was a workout.
But he was delighted with his decision. Ronald Wayne says, if I'd stayed with Apple, I would probably have wound up the richest guy in the cemetery. So often, the right decision is not the easy decision. So often, the decision that you take might cost you money, but it may very well be the right decision. Imagine if this crisis, this is called a cell phone, you might not know it. It looked a bit like this, actually. It just had a few more functions. It was fabulous. It was revolutionary, and you could play a game called Snake. It was brilliant. And the battery lasted a week. It was really good. But imagine had this crisis hit in the age of the Nokia 3310, or in the age of the dial-up modem. how much more trouble the world would be in than it is. Satya Nadella, the chief executive of Microsoft, says, we've seen 2 years of digital transformation in 2 months. In South Africa, Takealot say they're working on a business plan of 2025 and 26. They couldn't keep up. They had to catch up with their business plan. Things went so mad and were so good. I was talking to a guy the other day called Rob Paddock, who started a brand new online school in Joburg in January. Little did he know, demand would skyrocket, and they are accelerating this competition, their plans for the future. So what have we learned? We've learned certainly that science matters. My goodness me, have we learned that science matters. Pfizer, just this week, Monday, tell us that they've got a drug with 90% efficacy. It's got some problems. It's got to be, distributed at minus 70 degrees, and you've got to defrost it and then use it within 5 days, and then you've got to have 2 doses, so it's a bit awkward. But the only global multinational headquartered in Umhlanga, Aspen Pharmacare, has done a deal with Johnson & Johnson and will next year make 300 million doses of the drug that Johnson & Johnson wants to produce, should they get their regulatory approvals, and they will make a contribution as well. Science has never worked so fast for a solution to an outbreak. We're very lucky to live in the times that we do. Technology matters. If you didn't have the tech that you have, this year would have been catastrophic. And of course, leadership matters. At the risk of being political in a school in KZN, had this guy been in charge, I make no other judgments, but I hate to think where we would be. So, are you an optimist? Do you see the glass half full? Are you a half empty kind of person? Well, you don't even care what's in the glass, really. Because you're a realist. Because you know that you can't be an optimist all the time, you can't be a pessimist all the time. You're kind of in between the two, and you're going to be a problem solver into the future, and I certainly hope that you are. Just drink the glass of opportunity. You've been given a hell of a head start. You've been given an enormous head start. Don't waste it. And finally, as we talk about facts and information, perhaps before we get there, let me read you the third favorite book, which is this one, Dr. Seuss. Just a quick extract from Dr. Seuss, if I may, before I go and miss my flight. Oh, the places you will go. There's fun to be done, there are points to be scored, there are games to be won, and magical things you can do with that ball will make you the winningest winner of all. Fame, you'll be as famous can be, with the whole wide world watching you on TV. Except when they don't, because sometimes they won't. I'm afraid that sometimes you'll play lonely games too, games you can't win because you'll be playing against you. Whether you like it or not, alone is something you'll be quite a lot. And when you're alone, there's a good chance you'll meet things that will scare you right out of your pants. There's some down the road between hither and yon that can scare you so much that you won't want to go on. But on you will go, though the weather be foul. On you will go, though your enemies prowl. And on you will go, though the Hakencrucks howl. Those are Hakencrucks, scary. Onward and upward, and many a frightening creak, though your arms get sore and your sneakers may leak. On and on you will hike, and I know you'll hike far and face up to your problems, whatever they are. You'll get mixed up, of course. As you already know, you'll get mixed up with many strange birds as you go, but so be sure where you step. Step with great care and great tact, and remember that life's a great balancing act. Will you succeed? Yes, you will indeed, 98.75% guaranteed. Kid, you'll move mountains. So be your name, Buxbaum or Bixie or Braith or Mello Tabiso, Van Allen O'Shea, you're off to great places. I changed that bit for Hilton. Today is your day, your mountain is waiting. Get on your way. And whatever you do, and I know this to be true, a quote from the great Abraham Lincoln, whatever you do, don't believe everything you read on the internet. Thanks, guys. Thanks.
Chairman of the Board, Mr. Alistair Franklin, Headmaster, Mr. George Harris, Guest of Honor, Mr. Bruce Whitfield, parents, boys, friends and family of the Hilton community, and those joining us today digitally, I greet you. Mr. Whitfield, I know you're in a bit of a rush, so I want to just say a word of thanks before you quickly rush off. I am no corrupt politician, but today I must admit you left me dry-mouthed. I think your message today about finding hope and opportunity, even when you're overwhelmed by darkness and the heat of oppression, is so fitting considering the darkness and struggle we faced this year. I would suggest fact-finding your last quote there, but other than that, I must admit you gave us an amazing address today, and I'm so grateful for you being here today. And on behalf of the entire Hilton community, I ask that you please accept this small token of our appreciation. Could you give him a round of applause, please?
Please excuse me. I like having my name